Adam and Eve were not cast out of the Garden of Eden just because of a piece of fruit. We are all familiar with a story, passed down through countless generations. A perfect garden where the very first humans were given everything by God. No suffering, no worries, no tears, only peace. But then, one day, the serpent appeared. A whisper of temptation, a single bite, and everything came crashing down. That is the version we know by heart. They disobeyed, so God punished them. It sounds reasonable, but was it really that simple? So, what was the real reason? What made an all-powerful God, full of love, close the gates of Eden and send humanity out into a world of pain, sickness, and death? If it was only because of a piece of fruit, was that truly worth it? Think about it more carefully. If God only wanted human beings to obey without question, He could have chosen not to create the tree of the knowledge of good and evil at all. Or, at the very least, He could have kept the serpent away. Yet every detail was placed exactly where it needed to be, as if following a script. Could it be that this was not some unfortunate accident, but part of a much greater plan? For thousands of years, scholars, theologians, and philosophers have debated this moment. Some say it was the very first sin. Others believe it was the moment when humanity truly began to be human. And there are those bold enough to ask a daring question. What if God was not punishing, but protecting? The answer you are about to hear might completely change the way you see the Bible. It will no longer be just a story about disobedience, but a mirror reflecting our own lives, our choices, our mistakes, and our incredible ability to rise up and grow. So, let us begin this journey. Because the truth behind that expulsion is far more shocking than you have ever imagined. The familiar story, let me tell you once more. A story that almost all of us know. A story repeated over and over in churches and in classrooms, from parents to their children. A story of the beginning of humankind. In the Bible, the Garden of Eden appears as paradise itself. There, Adam and Eve lived in abundance. They did not toil. They did not know pain. Death did not exist. It was a place of perfection, eternal, created by the very hands of God. And then, in the middle of that garden, stood a tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God said to Adam, "You are free to eat from every tree in the garden, but that one you must not touch. For on the day you eat from it, you will surely die." And so, the very first law was given, a boundary, a limit. But then, the serpent appeared, cunning, quiet, and dangerous. It whispered into Eve's ear, "Did God really say?" "You must not eat from any tree in the garden." Eve replied, "We may eat from all of them, except for the tree in the middle of the garden. If we touch it, we will die." The serpent mocked, "You will not die. On the contrary, your eyes will be opened. You will be like God Himself, knowing good and evil." That was the decisive moment. Eve looked at the fruit. It was beautiful. It looked delicious. And it was desirable. She reached out, picked it, and took a bite. Then she handed it to Adam, and he ate as well. In that moment, everything changed. Their eyes were opened, but not to see glory, rather to see their nakedness. They realized they were unclothed. They quickly sewed leaves together to cover themselves. For the very first time, they felt shame. For the very first time, they felt fear. And when God came, they hid. The Almighty called out, "Adam, where are you?" Adam trembled. "I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, so I hid." The truth was exposed. The very first sin of humankind, disobedience, and then the punishment was declared. The serpent was cursed, forced to crawl on its belly and to eat dust for all its days. The woman was condemned to suffer pain in childbirth, too long for her husband, and yet be subject to him. The man was sentenced to labor, to sweat for his bread, until he returned to the dust. Finally, God cast them out of Eden. He placed mighty angels there, with a flaming sword flashing in every direction to guard the way to the tree of life. It was the tragic end of a story that once seemed so perfect. From paradise to earth, from eternal life to mortal death, from innocence to the burden of responsibility. But was that truly the whole story? A different perspective in the Bible, lest they eat from the tree of life and live forever. This line is rarely mentioned in ordinary sermons, but if you listen closely, a detail that could change the entire way we understand the story. Could it be that God was not only punishing them, but also protecting them? If Adam and Eve, after eating the forbidden fruit, had then eaten from the tree of life, they would have lived forever. But that would not have been life in purity or innocence. It would have been eternal life in a state of sin, of brokenness, of separation. They would have been trapped forever in distance from God, with no chance of redemption. So, when God drove them out of Eden, it may not have been only punishment, it was prevention, a barrier, a limit, so that sin could not become eternal. Casting them out is opening another path, a path of struggle, of sorrow, of hardship, but also a path of hope. Because only when humanity faces limits, only when death becomes real, can salvation carry meaning. If Adam and Eve had remained, living forever in a fallen state, then what meaning would the cross hold? Would the sacrifice of the Savior still be necessary? God closed the gates of Eden, but at the same time, He opened another door, the door into human history, a door for humanity to learn love, endurance, sacrifice, and to wait for a greater redemption. Perhaps we were wrong to think Eden was the lost prize, and the journey outside, with all its suffering and imperfection, is the true stage of humanity. Imagine if you were held forever in a perfect world with no pain, no responsibility, no choice. Would you truly be human? Or would you simply exist, living only by what was handed to you? God sent them away so they could have the chance to grow. And perhaps it was not a curse at all, but a blessing. A hard blessing to accept, but one that opened the possibility of freedom, redemption, and true love. So then, can we still be certain that expulsion from Eden was absolute punishment, or was it a carefully chosen step? The symbolic meaning, the forbidden fruit, was not only a prohibition, it was a symbol of freedom and of responsibility. Think about it. Why would there be a tree of the knowledge of good and evil right in the middle of the garden? Placing it there was like placing a doorway to choice. Without choice, humanity would be nothing more than programmed beings, with no real freedom at all. It was the forbidden fruit that turned Eden into a place of testing, and the disobedience of Adam and Eve was the very moment when humanity began to carry responsibility for its own decisions. Freedom always comes with consequences, and those consequences are not accidents. They are the very nature of freedom. The Garden of Eden was never meant to be eternal paradise. It was the shelter of humanity's childhood. In Eden, everything was provided. No labor, no choices, no confrontation with pain. Was that not the carefree state of a child? But a child cannot remain forever in the arms of their parents. There comes a time to step outside, to stumble, to hurt, and then to grow. In that way, Eden was the cradle, and the expulsion was the moment humanity left childhood and entered maturity. And what about you? In your life, have you ever faced your own forbidden fruit? A difficult decision, a choice you knew would change everything. Perhaps it was leaving behind a safe job to pursue a passion. Perhaps it was daring to speak the truth, even though you knew you might lose something precious. Or maybe it was simply choosing to walk a path different from what everyone else expected of you. Those moments were your Eden, and that was your forbidden fruit. You can choose safety, staying within the circle of the familiar. But if you do, you will never know how wide the world outside truly is. Just like Adam and Eve, stepping out of that gate meant facing suffering and uncertainty. But it was also the chance to discover the true meaning of life. Perhaps Eden was never meant to be the final destination. It was only the beginning. A beautiful beginning, yes, but one that could not last forever. Humanity was not created to remain in eternal innocence, but to grow, to learn how to love, to take responsibility, and to be free. And so, the story of Adam and Eve is not only their story, it is the story of all of us. Every time we face a choice, every time we reach out for the forbidden fruit in our own lives, we relive that very moment, the moment that defines who we are. Was it punishment or the beginning of freedom? That question is like a double-edged sword, tearing apart every traditional understanding. For thousands of years, people have looked at the event of Eden as a death sentence, a curse passed from one generation to the next. But if we stop there, we miss something deeper. The paradox hidden behind the closed gate. God cast Adam and Eve out of the garden. On the surface, it was punishment. Disobedience led to consequence. Simple, clear, but look closely. That gate did not only close, it also opened something else. A new path, a journey from which the entire story of humanity began. Could it be that this so-called punishment was in truth protection? Imagine this: if Adam and Eve, in their fallen state, had eaten from the tree of life, they would have become immortal. They would live forever, but in a broken identity. In a soul eternally separated from God, they would be trapped in darkness with no escape, and sin would no longer be temporary. It would become eternal. Perhaps expulsion from Eden was not the end, but an opportunity for sin not to last forever, an opportunity for humanity to encounter suffering, to face death, and through that, to discover the value of life, of love, of salvation. God closed the gates of Eden, but He opened a new road, a road of labor, a road of trial, a road of love, of sorrow, of sacrifice. Inside Eden, love demanded no cost. There was no loss. But when humanity was sent outside, love began to carry weight. For only when we fear losing something do we learn to cherish it. Only when we suffer do we truly understand joy. And only when we face death do we hunger for life. Perhaps punishment was actually the beginning of a greater blessing. The meaning of freedom. Freedom always comes with a price. Without responsibility, there is no real freedom. Without suffering, freedom is nothing but an illusion. In Eden, Adam and Eve lived in a world without choice. They did not need to find food. They did not need to labor. They did not face the fear of loss. Such a world might sound perfect, but in truth, it was not freedom. It was shelter. It was the cradle of childhood. Only when they stepped out of Eden did humanity truly face choice. And that choice, even though it was painful, was what made them who they were. God closed the gates of Eden, but He also opened a new road. A road where humanity would have to sweat in order to eat. A road where Eve would suffer in childbirth. A road where Adam would bear the responsibility of being human. But it was also on that road that they would learn what it meant to love. Think about it. Was the love in Eden truly love? If there was no fear of loss, no sacrifice, no trial, then love was only enjoyment. But once Adam and Eve stepped outside Eden, love became something to be guarded, something to be nurtured. They loved each other not simply because it was given, but because they chose to remain with one another through the suffering of life. Freedom is never cheap. It demands the courage to face consequences. And that is the message buried deep within the story of Eden. God gave humanity the chance to grow up. He gave them a world where they could love, where they could stumble, but also where they could stumble, but also where they could rise again and begin anew. Yes, the fall was not the end. It was the beginning of a greater story, the story of freedom. Throughout history, humanity has always longed for freedom, and yet trembled at the price it requires. From slaves yearning for liberation to nations rising against oppression. Freedom has always been tied to blood and tears. It has never been a free gift. And Adam and Eve were the very first to bear that cost. And what about you? Are you living in your own Eden, a place that feels safe, comfortable, but lacks real freedom? How many times have you had to step outside your comfort zone, accept the risk, and discover who you truly are? That is the spirit of Eden. Not to keep humanity trapped in blind obedience, but to send them out and teach them how to choose. Every choice, right or wrong, is etched into the essence of who we are. Eden has not disappeared. It lives within every decision we make. Every time we choose between safety and risk, between truth and lies, between love and selfishness. We are living again the story of Adam and Eve, and in choosing, we are fulfilling the very meaning of freedom. Perhaps that is the greatest gift of all. Not a perfect garden to live in forever, but the freedom to write the story of our own lives. Love through suffering, the pain of childbirth, the sweat of labor, things that at first sound like curses, are in fact the very foundation that makes love become real. In Eden, love was easy. Adam and Eve had nothing to worry about. They had everything. No hunger, no sickness, no fear. In a perfect world, love required no sacrifice. But for that very reason, it was fragile. It was like a flower kept safe under glass, beautiful, but never tested by wind or rain. When the gates of Eden closed, love was forced to step outside, to live in a world of suffering, of loss, of trials. And it was within that suffering that love discovered its true meaning. Think of a mother. When God said, "You will suffer greatly in childbirth," it appeared at first to be punishment. But who can deny that in the very moment she endures that pain, a mother becomes bound in the deepest way to her child? Every drop of sweat, every cry of agony, every brush with death itself becomes an invisible bond, making a mother's love unbreakable. If life were given without any cost, would that love still be so sacred? In the same way, when God said to Adam, "By the sweat of your brow you will eat your bread," yes, it was a burden, but at the same time, it was a blessing. For it is in that sweat that humanity learned to treasure every grain of rice, every piece of bread. Labor turned a meal into an achievement, not just a gift handed down. And through labor, humanity learned how to share, how to care for one another, how to build community. Look at our own lives. We only truly value happiness after we have faced loss. We only truly know love once we have tasted loneliness. After nearly losing them, love is not born in perfection. How many times in your life have you asked, why are the most precious things so often tied to pain? Why must we shed tears at a farewell before realizing how deep our love for someone really was? Why do we only appreciate a helping hand after we have struggled through the hardest days? It is because real love cannot grow in a carefree world. It needs the soil of tears, of blood, and of sacrifice. The story of Eden shows us what we call a curse may simply be another way of describing growth. Childbirth, painful, yet it brings forth life. Labor, exhausting, yet it brings meaning. Suffering, brutal, yet it is the very place where love finds its depth. A love that has never been tested fades too easily. But love forged in suffering is carved deep into the soul, never to be erased. So do not see God's decree only as a sentence. See it as an invitation to enter into real love. Love that sacrifices, that cherishes, and that chooses to live fully, even in the midst of pain. Sacrifice and redemption without the fall. The very ideas of sacrifice and forgiveness would never exist. In Eden, humanity knew nothing of sin. They knew nothing of the cost of mistakes. They did not need forgiveness because they had never done wrong. They did not need sacrifice because they had never lost anything. A perfect world sounds ideal, but it also meant there was no chance for love to rise above mere instinct. But once Adam and Eve took a bite of the forbidden fruit, everything changed. The first mistake of humanity opened a road paved with blood and tears. Yet it was on that road that the most precious things first appeared. Without the fall, there would be no forgiveness. Without loss, there would be no sacrifice. Without darkness, humanity would never long for the light. The story of Eden, in one perspective, was the very beginning of redemption. Because from that moment on, human history began waiting for something greater, a promise, a hope, someone who would come to mend what had been broken. Throughout the Old Testament, we see countless signs of that hope, from offerings of lambs and blood, from strict laws and rituals. All of it was only a shadow of a more complete redemption to come. Humanity had fallen, and therefore humanity needed a sacrifice great enough to carry everything. And then, in the New Testament, that image was revealed fully at the cross. The Savior, Jesus Christ, was the answer to that moment in Eden. Without the forbidden fruit, without the expulsion, there would never have been the cross. Without blood being shed, there would be no forgiveness. Eden was the place where humanity lost its innocence. The cross was the place where humanity found its redemption. One was the closing of a gate. The other was the opening of true paradise. And do you see? From a single mistake, love reached its highest form. The love that dares to sacrifice. A father working himself to the bone to provide for his family. A mother enduring every pain to keep her child alive. A friend who chooses loss for the sake of protecting another. All of these images reflect the shadow of sacrifice that began in Eden. Without the fall, we would never understand the power of forgiveness. Forgiveness means nothing in a world without mistakes. Sacrifice has no value in a world without loss. But when Adam and Eve stumbled, everything changed. And from that moment, human love gained the chance to rise above instinct, to become sacred. Eden began the story of the fall, but the cross completed the story of redemption. Two ends of a single journey, a journey authored by God Himself, so that humanity would not only know how weak we are, but also how great His love truly is. So, do not see Eden only as a tragedy. See it as the first page of a greater book. A book whose most important chapter is the chapter of sacrifice and redemption. Humanity and the power to define itself. The moment Adam and Eve stepped through the gates of Eden, they did not just leave a garden. They left behind a state of being, a state of innocence, of dependence, of carefree simplicity. And from that moment, they began a new journey, the journey of defining themselves. In Eden, everything was provided. No need to build houses. No need to create laws. No need to distinguish good from evil, because all was safe within the embrace of the Creator. But when Eden closed, the real world opened, and humanity was forced to write its own rules with its own hands. Eden was humanity's kindergarten. The real world was humanity's university. In the kindergarten of Eden, humans only knew obedience. They bore no responsibility. They paid no price for mistakes. But in the university of the world, humanity began to learn its hardest lessons. Building society, establishing laws, shaping culture. With bare hands, they learned how to make fire. Out of fear, they created myths. Out of conflict, they wrote laws. And out of the desire to rise higher, they built civilizations. All of it began the moment they left Eden. You see, when paradise was no longer handed to them, humanity had to create its own paradise. That was instinct, but it was also destiny. No longer were fruits hanging ready on the branch. Humanity learned to cultivate crops. No longer was there Eden's sheltering canopy. Humanity learned to build homes. No longer were divine laws imposed directly. Humanity learned to write constitutions and lay down the foundations of justice. Leaving Eden, humanity began asking the great questions. Who are we? Why do we live? What is right? What is wrong? Every question, every answer was another step on the path of self-definition. And you are walking that same journey. When you look into the mirror, when you choose a career, when you decide who to love, how to live, you are doing what Adam and Eve did from the very beginning, defining yourself. Eden teaches us that innocence may be beautiful, but it cannot last. Leaving Eden is painful, but it is necessary. For only when the shelter is gone do we learn how to grow. Only when nothing is given do we learn how to create. Look at history. Humanity created laws to restrain violence. They wrote epics to capture their aspirations. They built cultures to seek meaning within chaos. These are clear proofs that in leaving Eden, humanity did not lose everything. They only lost innocence. In exchange for the right to write their own story. So do not see expulsion as the end. See it as a coming of age. From Eden's kindergarten, humanity entered the harsh university of the real world. And it was in that very university that humanity truly became human. Comparison with reality. The story of Eden may seem like a distant, ancient myth, but in truth, it is still being repeated right here in our modern world. In the past, the forbidden fruit was the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Today, the forbidden fruit can take many forms: technology, power, scientific knowledge, things that are tempting, filled with enormous potential, yet also carrying unimaginable dangers. Look at technology. Each step forward opens a new world, giving us powers never before imagined. But the question remains, are we wise enough to use them? Or are we repeating Eve's footsteps, reaching out for the forbidden fruit of technology without fully understanding the consequences? Look at power. From ancient dynasties to modern politics, power has always been a sweet, forbidden fruit. It makes people crave, fight, and trample over one another. Power promises greatness, but it can also plunge entire nations into tragedy. Look at scientific knowledge. From the moment humans discovered fire, to the conquest of the skies, to walking on the moon, knowledge has made us creators, second only to God. But at the same time, knowledge has placed in our hands the ability to destroy ourselves. How different is this from Eden? Long ago, the serpent whispered, "You will be like God." Today, the advances of science and technology whisper the same. You can become God. The question is, are we repeating Eden in the 21st century? When we edit genes to create new life, we are stepping dangerously close to the tree of life. When we create artificial intelligence that may surpass the human mind, we are tasting the forbidden fruit of infinite knowledge. When we place immense power in the hands of a few, we are standing at the edge of injustice and chaos. Eden is not only a story of the past. Eden is a mirror reflecting our present. And every generation, every human being, must face their own forbidden fruit. So what is the only difference? In the past, Adam and Eve had just one choice: to eat or not to eat. Today, we face countless choices, every day, every hour, every minute, and each of those choices carries within it the weight of Eden. The 21st century gives us power beyond imagination. But that power comes with an ancient question that has never lost its urgency. Are we mature enough to live with the forbidden fruit? Or will we lose paradise once again? A timeless symbol, low, slow voice, setting the tone. Eden is not confined to a few pages of the Bible. It has outgrown the boundaries of religion to become a symbol, alive throughout the history of humanity. From philosophy, literature, and painting to music and film, Eden keeps returning like a haunting shadow that never disappears. Pause, firm voice. That proves something. Eden is not merely a religious event. Eden is a universal symbol, reaching to the very roots of the human experience. Slower, reflective voice. In philosophy, the story of Eden is often tied to the ideas of freedom and human will. Existentialist thinkers such as Kierkegaard and Sartre once described the moment Adam bit into the forbidden fruit as the perfect illustration of the anxiety of freedom, the moment we know we can choose, but must also bear the weight of its consequences. Eden, then, becomes a metaphor for the eternal conflict between safety and freedom. In literature, Eden is everywhere. Milton, in his epic Paradise Lost, portrayed the expulsion of Adam and Eve with heartbreaking sorrow, yet also emphasized that their loss opened the door for humanity to discover a new Eden within the heart. Modern writers have used Eden as a metaphor for lost childhood, for a dream of innocence that we can never return to. Voice rising, more urgent. In painting, from the Renaissance to modern times, Eden has always been a central theme. Paintings of Adam and Eve standing by the tree of forbidden fruit, or of their expulsion by the angel, do more than illustrate scripture. They reflect humanity's obsession with loss, with imperfection, and with the longing for a paradise lost. Music, too, is filled with Eden. Classical compositions inspired by scripture, modern songs that sing of paradise, all of them reveal how Eden has become a shared language for expressing desire, sorrow, and hope. Pause, slow, resonant voice. Why does Eden appear everywhere? Because Eden touches something timeless. It speaks of all of us. It is our collective memory, our primal longing for a perfect world, a world we are always trying to return to. Direct, personal tone. Do you realize this? Every time we long for the innocence of childhood, we are yearning for Eden. Every time we wish life had no pain, we are searching for Eden. And every time we grow weary of this complicated world, we dream of a first place, a place without burdens, without tears, low, weighted voice. But Eden is not only the past. It is also the future. It is the promise of a day of restoration, a day when humanity will rediscover the harmony it once lost. That is why from church to concert hall, from books to paintings, still lives, still speaks, still takes shape, again and again. Pause, strong, concluding voice. Eden is not only a garden, it is an eternal symbol, a mirror for humanity's longing, humanity's fears, and humanity's hope. And because Eden is a symbol, it is never bound by religion, belongs to all of humankind. The paradoxical message, perhaps, punishment was actually the very first step toward a greater blessing. This is the great paradox at the heart of the Eden story. On the surface, it was a loss. Humanity was cast out of paradise, forced to suffer, confronted with death. But hidden within that loss was a blessing far greater. If Eden was the place where humanity lived without choices, then leaving Eden was the opening of the door to true freedom. If Eden was the place without responsibility, then the world outside was where humanity learned to bear the weight. If Eden was the place without suffering, then life beyond Eden was where we learned how to love. Losing Eden was losing safety, but in that very loss of safety, we found our true humanity. This philosophy is everywhere in life. A child cannot remain forever in the arms of their parents. The time comes to leave, to stumble, to fail, to be hurt, and only then to grow. A person cannot remain forever in carefree innocence. The time comes when we must face pain, injustice, difficult choices, and it is in those moments that we discover who we are. Eden, in that sense, was not a paradise lost, but the beginning of the journey of becoming human. Perhaps we are only truly human when we know pain. We only truly know love. When we have known loss, we only truly understand the value of life. When we face death. So losing Eden was not a curse. It was a lesson, a paradox. Losing in order to gain, falling in order to rise, dying in order for life to have meaning. Have you ever felt as though you were being driven out of Eden? Maybe it was when you lost a job you thought was secure. Maybe it was the day you said goodbye to someone you believed would be with you forever. Maybe it was the moment you realized the world was harsher than you imagined. But then, years later, you looked back and saw that those very losses had made you wiser, stronger, more human. Eden was never the only place humanity could live. The world outside was where humanity learned how to survive. And it was in the tears, in the wounds, in the struggles, that humanity found its true identity. So when God cast Adam and Eve out of Eden, He did not only take away, He also gave. He gave them a journey, an opportunity for humanity to discover itself. Perhaps losing Eden was not the end. Perhaps losing Eden was the beginning of becoming truly human. We have traveled a long journey from the moment Adam and Eve stepped out of Eden to the moment we began to see that story as a mirror reflecting our own lives. And now, before closing this climax, let us pause for a moment to look back at it all. At first, we thought Eden was only punishment, a severe sentence for disobedience. But as we dug deeper, we saw that it was also protection. Protection from being trapped forever in a fallen state without ever having a chance at redemption. Then we discovered that the very expulsion opened the door to the true meaning of freedom. Freedom is never cheap. It demands responsibility. It demands a price. It demands that humanity confronts suffering. But it is precisely in that suffering that love and choice gain their meaning. And then we saw that pain was not merely a curse. The agony of childbirth, the sweat of labor, what first seemed like misfortune, became the foundation of real love. Because Only when we pay a price do we learn to value. From there, we understood sacrifice and redemption would never carry meaning without Eden. The fall was the beginning of forgiveness. Loss was the stage upon which love grew into sacrifice. Eden closed, but the cross opened, the journey stretching from creation to salvation. Eden did not stop at religion. It marked humanity's journey of self-definition. Leaving Eden, humanity began to build societies, laws, cultures. Eden was kindergarten. The real world was the university of humankind. And every choice, every trial became the lessons humanity had to learn in order to grow. But the story is not only about the past, it is also about the present. Today, we still face new forbidden fruits, technology, power, knowledge, things that promise strength but also hide the threat of destruction. And the question still echoes, are we repeating Eden in the 21st century? That is why Eden has become a timeless symbol. From philosophy, literature, and painting to music, Eden always returns as a shared haunting of humanity, because it is not only a religious tale, but a universal metaphor for human longing, fear, and hope. And the greatest paradox lies right here. Perhaps punishment was actually the first step toward a greater blessing. Losing Eden was not losing everything. Losing Eden was the chance to discover true humanity. No longer innocence, but maturity. No longer guiltlessness, but freedom. No longer a paradise already prepared, but the chance to build a paradise with our own hands. And that is where we stand now, between past and present, between the Eden we lost and the Eden still to come. Now, before we move into the final part, hold on to this thought. The story of Eden has never only been about the past. It has always been the story of today, of you, of me. And the final message we are about to reach may just change the way you see your very own life. And so, we have walked together on a long journey, from the ancient Garden of Eden to the modern world of today. From a story that seemed at first to be only about a piece of fruit, to the deeper meanings of freedom, responsibility, pain, love, sacrifice, and redemption. Now, let us summarize with a few simple but important truths, not only about the forbidden fruit, not only about punishment, but perhaps it was the plan for humanity to truly grow. Eden was the beginning, but it was never meant to be the destination. It was the cradle, the childhood of humankind. When the gates of Eden closed, humanity did not just lose safety, they received an opportunity, the opportunity to step into the journey of maturity. Adam and Eve left Eden, but they carried within them a seed, the seed of freedom, the seed of responsibility. And from that seed, the entire history of humanity was written. Great civilizations, tragedies, wars, inventions, symphonies, works of art, and everlasting love stories. If they had remained in Eden forever, perhaps none of this would have ever existed. We often think punishment is the end. But sometimes punishment is a door. It closes one path, but opens another, broader, longer, richer in meaning. So when you face a loss in life, when you feel as though you have been driven out of your own Eden, remember this: it may not be the end. It may be the beginning. Because sometimes what we think is punishment is actually the very first step toward freedom. Maybe you have endured a bitter failure. Maybe you have lost the person you loved most. Maybe you are wandering in a dark season, feeling as if every door has closed. But look again at the story of Eden. Believe that after one door shuts, another always opens. That within pain, there is always a hidden seed of blessing. The story of Adam and Eve, in the end, is not only about them. It is about us. About you, about me, about every human being walking the path of maturity, with mistakes, with stumbles, and with the courage to rise again. Eden reminds us that freedom always comes with responsibility, that love only gains its meaning through suffering, that forgiveness and sacrifice exist only because we once fell, and that sometimes, to become ourselves, we must leave the place of safety and step into an imperfect world. Losing Eden was how humanity found its true self, and perhaps each of us has our own Eden, a safe, familiar, comfortable place that we must leave in order to grow. It might be childhood. It might be an old love. It might be a secure job we abandon to follow a passion. Whatever it is, the moment we step out of that Eden, we begin to write our own story of maturity. And so, Eden was never the end. Eden was the beginning. Sometimes what we think is punishment is actually the very first step toward freedom. If this perspective has made you see things differently, press subscribe to continue discovering the hidden truths within the Bible. And do not forget to share this video so that others may also have the chance to look at the story of Eden through a new lens. Because sometimes all it takes is one different perspective for an old story to become completely new.